70% of games are won by the team holding height at the end of the 7th zone. This stat refers to a regular set lobby like the FNCS round 4s of the qualifiers or the finals, but in a reboot round style game where all that matters is the victory royale, does this still hold up as the best way to win? Especially since the Grand Royale coming up has a qualification system that's confusing, but all you need to know is that you need to win a game in one of these 32 victory path games and you qualify through to the finals. Luckily, we have a lot of these style of games to look at, given that FNCS this season had a day 2 of the semi-finals that had 12 matches of reboot style games where all that mattered was the victory royale. So I looked at all 12 of the EU games to figure out how to actually win. I think it's always important to look at the layers that the game was won from first. 2 out of the 12 games are won from the low ground, 1 out of the 12 games is won from the mid ground, and 9 out of the 12 games were won from height. Now this is a relatively small sample size, given it's only one region I'm looking at. This generally aligns with what we've seen from previous seasons' reboot rounds, where taking height will almost definitely be the best way to win the game. That should be absolutely no surprise to anyone who's played a lot of Fortnite competitive, but that's not what's important. It's how, and most importantly the when, that's critical in reboot style games. 0 games were won by the team that was holding height at the 5th zone. Now this is basically because everyone knows they need height at some point to win, so they just use their launch pad during the first moving and fully cycle onto height, usually griefing their own game and the team that's on height already. Clearly this isn't a successful strategy, given only 1 out of the 9 games that was won from height, the retake happened during that 6th zone, and this was Michael, Verox and Astro who didn't do this. They instead padded to the front side of zone and took advantage of the messy fight that was going on at the back side of the zone. There was 3 games won from height when it was taken in the 7th zone, 1 in the 8th zone, and 4 in the 9th zone, the final moving circle. So in these style of games, there's definitely a tendency for later retakes to be more successful, and taking it in the 5th and 6th zones really is not advised. Aqua for Strokey and CRR were a great example of this. During basically all the first 5 out of the 6 games, they were just going for height in this exact spot and continually either were contested on the higher ground or just lost it straight up. Then in that final game, they finally understood this, waited, played mid ground, they ensured they're on a high layer, and then took advantage of high ground in that final moving zone and ended up winning the game from then on out. Most of the height retakes are pretty simple as well. Get ahead of the zone, ensure to elevate as the zones go on so you're close to height. Have one member always looking up at height for an opportunity to retake it, specifically if there are teams fighting for it. You spray from the front side of the zone and take it for yourself. There was also, of course, plays for desperation too, like in the final game of Heat 2 when Crow and Diox just padded as a duo onto height in the final moving circle as they had no mats left, had no real opportunity to do anything else on that layer, so went up to height, picked up rest guard, and then won the game. This video isn't going to cover all of the ways you can actually retake height. I've already covered 10 different ways you can take height in my taking height in the moving zones video on gameplan.com/Reisshub. You like how smooth my plug was getting? I'm getting good at this one for selling my masterclass. Let's go. Okay, anyway, we know the importance of height, but how are the games actually won? Most people expect reboot style games to be an intense heal off where every team has 400 floppers, but that just isn't the case on average. If we look back through some of the past reboot rounds, there were very few that actually went down to heal off. The first NA East reboot round that was won by Zayt, Saf and Stretch, the final zone hadn't even closed yet. Remember the Sprite 1v3 reboot round finish? Again, not a heal off.
Nice! Starfish. 14 builds.
Went up. Nice! He has to go through a building.
1 builds. 4 builds.
He has to go through a building.
Nice. Got your finish. No more builds.
He's coming up.
The only one that comes to mind, one of the major ones, was Bucky Macwood and Illust in Season 7 that I was actually casting with Monster Deface.
So many heals there. I think Niddle might just have it here. It's so hard to call. Is there enough in the feed? We'll see.
I hope there's enough. I really do.
Oh my gosh.
Niddle has half of the loot of the map
Macwood
on
has
his
more.
box, but Macwood still has more too. There's no way
He's
that
done it.
Macwood will pick up the victory royale alongside. Obviously, there are more heal offs than this, but just on average, not as many will go to heal off as you would expect. There are a few reasons for this. The first one is just zone RNG. If zones don't pull back on themselves, it's very unlikely that players will have enough materials to build all the way to the end of the 9th zone, so they'll be forced to fight for the victory royale. This lack of materials also happens because most players just dwindle them away, going for inefficient height retakes that don't work early on, as we've already mentioned. And you've also got to remember that most people in these lobbies are scared to fight and they're really tunnel visioned on that win, meaning they just endlessly use their materials to tunnel rather than being confident in fighting for refreshes. This means that when you pick up refreshes in the end game, most people will just have less mats because they've already used them tunneling, meaning there's less for you to tarp with, and the end result of that is even smaller chance that the game will end in a heal off. Looking at the 12 EU games, this trend is continued. Only 3 of the 12 games were won by a heal off, and the rest were won in a traditional manner. And one of the interesting things about this season is that there really wasn't as much use of floppers on the EU region in particular, with medkits and cabbages having a way higher utility. Knowing the spawn locations of the cabbages alongside a lot of the other fruit and vegetables in the early and mid game can be extremely valuable, even if it doesn't go down to a heal off, just in case those zones do pull back, you're covered. Of course, a well-timed medkit right at 8 seconds before the final zone close was also imperative in these heal-offs being successful. Especially if you combine this with cabbages afterwards, you can do a double medkit play, which we didn't actually see once, but it's also a strategy that you should prepare for if you have the inventory to do so, and I'm saying you definitely should have the inventory prepared to do this if you drop around some of these cabbaged areas. I'm not saying that floppers weren't a viable strategy for winning reboot round style games, they definitely are, but during this FNCS the shadow floppers was a huge part of the competitive loot pool, meaning that players were opting to take these over floppers, and actually Vettel, ETQ and Surprise used this to take height and win in game 3 of heat number 1. I think in Grand Royale, with now the removal of shadow floppers from the loot pool, we'll see a higher usage of floppers in heal off plays. The biggest takeaway I got from looking at these 12 games, outside of the fact that obviously most of them are won by really late height takes, was the fact that being able to efficiently and confidently frag on the mid ground is really key regardless of what style of game you play. If you want to win on the height, you need those refreshes to keep enough materials to take height later on in the moving zones, and if you want to pull a heal off, you can't rely on zone RNG pulling back repeatedly, so you need to be able to pick up refreshes to keep your team moving and to give yourself lots of materials. Hope you guys enjoyed this video and learned a lot. Peace.